A great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive dome above Jake Morrison's head. He stood alone on the small platform in the center, surrounded by hundreds of alien beings who looked down at him with cold eyes. The human ambassador wore his best diplomatic uniform, but felt very small in this place, where the fate of entire worlds was decided. Jake had been to the council chambers many times before, but today felt different. The air itself seemed heavy with tension and anger. Around him sat the representatives of 4 major alien species who controlled most of the galaxy. They had called this emergency session to deal with what they called the human problem. High above on the largest platform sat Speaker Vexthara of the Zephyrian Empire. The reptilian creature was nearly 12 feet tall, with scales that shifted color when he was angry. His yellow eyes fixed on Jake like a predator watching prey. The Zephyrians had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years, and did not like being challenged by newcomers. To his left sat the Veltari delegation. These beings looked like living crystal formations that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. They spoke through harmonic vibrations that translated into music-like sounds. The Veltari prided themselves on logic and order and saw humans as chaotic and unpredictable. On the right side were the representatives of the Hive Collective. The insect-like creatures moved together in perfect synchronization as if controlled by one mind. Their compound eyes reflected rainbow colors, and their clicking sounds created an endless background noise. They valued unity above all else, and could not understand human independence. The strangest delegates were the Luminari, who appeared as shifting clouds of energy contained within transparent suits. They had no fixed form and communicated through flashes of light that hurt human eyes to look at directly. They were the oldest species in the council and considered themselves superior to all physical beings. Behind Jake stood Commander Lisa Grant from Earth Defense Force Intelligence. She was a small woman with sharp eyes who missed nothing. Her job was to record everything that happened and send reports back to Earth. Lisa had warned Jake that this meeting would not go well. Speaker Vexthara rose from his seat and the chamber fell silent. When he spoke, his voice boomed across the vast space without need for amplification. Ambassador Morrison, you stand before this council to answer for the crimes of your species. Jake kept his face calm, even though his heart was beating fast. He had been a Marine before becoming a diplomat and knew how to control his fear. I am here to represent the interests of humanity as always, Speaker Vexthara. The reptilian scales shifted to angry red patterns. Your interests have brought conflict to peaceful systems. Your species expands without permission and takes what does not belong to them. This cannot continue. The Veltari delegate chimed in with musical tones. Humans show no respect for established boundaries. They settle on worlds already claimed by council authority. Their behavior threatens the stability we have maintained for millennia. Jake had heard these complaints before. The truth was more complex than the council wanted to admit. Humans had only settled on worlds that were truly empty or had been abandoned by other species. But the council claimed ownership of vast areas of space they had never actually used or explored. The Hive Collective representative clicked rapidly before speaking. Individual thinking leads to chaos. Humans refuse proper integration with galactic society. They must be brought to order. Speaker Vexthara spread his massive arms wide. A time for patience has ended. Humanity will accept council authority or face the consequences. Jake straightened his shoulders. This was the moment he had been dreading, but also preparing for. What exactly are you demanding of my people? The speaker's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. First, all human settlements in disputed territories must be abandoned within 30 standard days. Your people will return to the systems you held before your illegal expansion began. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but said nothing. Those disputed territories included mineral-rich worlds that humanity needed to support its growing population. Abandoning them would mean economic disaster. Second, continued the speaker, the human military will submit to council oversight. Your fleet movements and weapons development will require our approval. No more warships will be built without permission. This demand was even worse than the first. It would make humanity defenseless against any future threats. Jake knew that. Earth's leaders would never accept such terms. Third, humanity will pay reparations to the species harmed by your expansion. The amount will be determined by council experts and must be paid over the next 50 years. The final demand was an insult designed to bankrupt human civilization. Jake realized this was not really a negotiation at all. The council had already decided to crush humanity and was just making it seem legal. The luminary delegate flashed bright patterns that translated his words. These terms are generous considering your crimes. Many in the council favored immediate military action. Jake looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces watching him. Some seemed curious about how he would respond. Others looked bored as if this was just routine business. A few appeared hungry for conflict. Speaker Vexthara leaned forward. On his platform, you have heard our requirements, Ambassador Morrison. What is humanity's answer? Jake had known this moment would come eventually. Humanity's rapid expansion into space had made them enemies among species that preferred the old ways. The council saw humans as dangerous upstarts who needed to be controlled before they became too powerful. He thought about the colonies he had visited during his years as ambassador. Families building new lives on distant worlds. Children born under alien stars who had never seen Earth. Scientists making discoveries that could benefit all species. Engineers solving problems that had puzzled aliens for centuries. The council wanted to destroy all of that because they feared change. They wanted to keep the galaxy exactly as it had been for thousands of years, with themselves in control of everything. Jake stood quietly for a long moment, while the chamber waited. Commander Grant shifted slightly behind him, and he could feel her tension. She knew as well as he did that the wrong words here could start a war. Finally, Jake raised his head and looked directly at Speaker Vexthara. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the vast chamber without showing any fear. Speaker Vexthara, honored delegates of the Galactic Council, I have listened carefully to your demands. You want humanity to abandon the worlds we have legally settled. You want us to give up our right to defend ourselves. You want us to pay tribute for the crime of existing. The chamber buzzed with angry sounds from the various alien species. Jake continued speaking over the noise. You call us criminals, but provide no evidence of crimes. You claim we threaten peace, but we have never attacked another species first. You demand we submit to your authority, but offer nothing in return except the promise not to destroy us. Speaker Vexthara's scales turned deep red with rage. You forget your place, human. This council has the power to erase your species from existence. Jake smiled grimly. Perhaps you do. But you seem to forget something important about humans. We don't kneel, we don't beg, and we don't surrender our freedom because someone bigger tells us to. The reptilian speaker rose to his full height. Then you reject the council's generous offer? Jake looked around the chamber one more time, at the aliens who saw humanity as nothing more than an annoyance to be dealt with, at the beings who thought they owned the galaxy and everything in it, at the creatures who believed might made right. The answer is no, Jake said clearly. We reject your demands completely. The chamber erupted in sounds of outrage. Clicks, hisses, musical tones, and flashing lights filled the air. Some delegates were already reaching for communication devices to contact their fleets, but Jake was not finished. He waited for the noise to die down, then spoke again in a voice that cut through the chaos like a blade. You have made your position clear, honored counsel. Now let me make ours equally clear. He paused and looked directly at Speaker Vexthara. You wanted war? You got it. The Situation Room in the Pentagon was filled with smoke from too many cigarettes and the tension of people who knew they were planning for the survival of their species. President Karan Daniels sat at the head of the long table looking tired but determined. She had been in office for 3 years and never expected to be the one making decisions about humanity's first galactic war. Jake Morrison had returned from the council chambers 12 hours ago, and his words still echoed in everyone's minds. The alien response had been swift and brutal. Within 6 hours of his declaration, every human diplomat in council space had been arrested or expelled. Trade agreements were canceled, and human ships were ordered to leave alien territory immediately. General Pete Collins spread star charts across the table with the locations of human colonies marked in blue and known, alien fleet positions in red. The old soldier had fought in 3 wars on Earth, but nothing had prepared him for this scale of conflict. The numbers are not good, he said bluntly. Council fleets outnumber us 3-to-1 in major warships. Their technology is more advanced. In most areas, especially shields and energy weapons. If we fight them in traditional space battles, we will lose. Secretary of Defense Amy Rodriguez nodded grimly. Intelligence reports suggest they are assembling a massive fleet to make an example of us. The Zephyrians want to show the galaxy what happens when you defy council authority. Lisa Grant, who had returned with Jake, pulled up tactical displays on the room screens. The council expects us to fight like they do. Formation battles with honor codes and predictable strategies. They have been fighting the same way for centuries and cannot imagine anything different. President Daniels looked around the table. At her advisors. What advantages do we have? Dr. Elena Vasquez cleared her throat nervously. She was head of advanced defense research and had been working on classified projects for years. Madam President, there are things the Council does not know about our capabilities. Projects we have kept secret, even from our own all-wise. She activated a holographic display showing the outer edges of human space. Project Midnight Sun has been operational for 18 months. We have hidden automated defense platforms throughout our territory. They look like asteroids or space debris, but contain powerful weapons and fusion reactors. The display zoomed in to show details of the hidden platforms. Each one was the size of a small building, but designed to look like natural objects. They could remain dormant for years, then activate in seconds when needed. How many platforms are we talking about? Asked General Collins. Over 3,000 in key locations, Dr. Vasquez replied. Each one can engage multiple targets with kinetic impactors that travel at significant fractions of light speed. Alien shields are designed to stop energy weapons, but solid projectiles at those velocities will punch through anything. Captain Roy Bennett of the USS Defiance leaned forward with interest. He commanded the newest class of human warships and had been pushing for unconventional tactics and training exercises. What about our fleet capabilities? Admiral Nancy Torres took over the briefing. She was a compact woman with gray hair who had earned her rank fighting pirates in the outer systems. Our ships are smaller and less heavily armed than Council vessels, but we have advantages they do not expect. Human vessels are faster and more maneuverable. Our crews are trained for independent action rather than rigid formations. She brought up specifications for the latest human warships. We have been reverse engineering captured alien technology for the past 5 years. Our new ships incorporate improvements the aliens never thought of. Better engines, more efficient reactors, and adaptive armor that can reconfigure itself during battle. Jake Morrison spoke for the first time since giving his report. What about ground forces? The Council will try to occupy human worlds to force our surrender. Colonel Frank Davis answered that question. He was a weathered veteran who had served in special operations before taking command of planetary defense forces. Human Marines are trained for flexible tactics in all environments. Council forces are used to fighting other aliens who follow predictable patterns. They have never faced an enemy that adapts constantly during combat. President Daniels studied the faces around the table. These people were preparing to fight a war that could end human civilization, but none of them seemed ready to give up. What are our chances if we fight? General Collins was quiet for a moment before answering. In a conventional war, we would lose within months. But humans do not fight conventional wars when our survival is at stake. We fight dirty. We use every advantage we can find or create. We make the enemy pay such a high price for victory that they question whether it was worth starting the fight. Dr. Vasquez activated another display showing research facilities hidden throughout human space. We have been developing new weapons based on technologies the Council banned centuries ago. Artificial intelligence systems, biological warfare agents, and quantum disruptor devices. They outlawed these weapons because they considered them too dangerous for civilized beings to use. The room fell silent as everyone realized what she was suggesting. President Daniels stared at the display, showing weapons that could kill entire planets. Are you recommending we use banned weapons against civilian populations? No, Madam President, Dr. Vasquez said quickly. But the Council does not know we have these capabilities. The threat alone might make them reconsider their actions. And some of these weapons could be very effective against military targets without causing civilian casualties. Admiral Torres pulled up fleet deployment charts. The enemy expects us to defend our colonies in place. Instead, I propose we evacuate non-essential personnel and use mobile defense tactics. Hit and run attacks against their supply lines. Force them to chase us through space where we choose the battlefield. Captain Bennett nodded enthusiastically. My ship has been testing new stealth technologies. We can make our vessels nearly invisible to alien sensors for short periods. Perfect for surprise attacks against larger formations. Lisa Grant added her analysis. Intelligence suggests the Council species do not work well together despite their alliance. The Zephyrians want to crush us quickly to demonstrate their power. The Veltari prefer careful planning and minimal casualties. The Hive Collective wants to capture human technology intact. The Luminari just want us to stop disrupting their meditation. Those differences could be exploited, noted Secretary Rodriguez. If we can make the war costly enough, some Council members might decide peace is preferable. President Daniels stood and walked to the window overlooking the Capitol. Outside, she could see people going about their normal lives, unaware that their leaders were planning for war against an entire galaxy. How long do we have before they attack? Jake Morrison consulted his notes from the Council session. Speaker Vexthara gave us 48 hours to reconsider our position. After that, they will send what he called a pacification fleet to enforce compliance. Based on Council fleet movements, we estimate they will begin their attack in 72 hours. General Collins began issuing orders. All military personnel are recalled to active duty immediately. Civilian shipping is suspended and converted to military support roles. Colonial militias are activated and placed under federal command. Dr. Vasquez gathered her classified files. I will contact research facilities and begin production of our special weapons. If the Council wants a war, they will get one unlike anything they have ever seen. Admiral Torres studied the star charts with new eyes. We need to make them believe we are weak while preparing our real defenses. Let them think their first attacks are succeeding while we position our forces for maximum impact. President Daniels turned back to face the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to fight for the survival of our species against enemies who see us as primitive barbarians. They think they can intimidate us into submission because that is how they have controlled the galaxy for centuries. She walked back to her chair, but remained standing. They are wrong. Humans do not submit to bullies, no matter how big or powerful they claim to be. We will show them what happens when you threaten our families and our freedom. The President looked at each person in the room. Send our answer to the Council. Tell them we have considered their generous offer very carefully. She smiled grimly. Tell them we would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Jake Morrison gathered his diplomatic files, knowing he might never need them again. What about negotiations? Should we leave any option for peaceful resolution? President Daniels shook her head. The Council made their position clear. Submit or be destroyed. They do not want peace. They want our unconditional surrender. She paused. Give them our answer, Admiral Torres. Show them what happens when you corner a human. The bridge of the Zephyrian flagship Eternal Glory was a monument to imperial power. Admiral Kethvar stood on the raised command platform surveying displays that showed his massive fleet approaching the human mining station at Kepler. Behind him worked dozens of junior officers who had never known defeat in their centuries of service to the Empire. Kethvar was old even by Zephyrian standards and had commanded fleets when the Council first encountered humanity 50 years ago. He remembered thinking then that these strange bipedal creatures might be useful as servants or soldiers. Now he was here to teach them the price of defying their betters. The first fleet consisted of 12 dreadnoughts, each the size of a human city. 40 heavy cruisers provided support, along with over 100 smaller vessels for reconnaissance and screening. It was enough firepower to reduce an entire star system to radioactive debris, and Kethvar intended to use every bit of it. Status report. He commanded in the harsh Zephyrian language that sounded like grinding stone. Sub-Admiral Vexka consulted his displays. We will drop out of hyperspace in 30 minutes. Long-range sensors show minimal activity at the target. Station. Human defensive preparations appear limited. Kethvar was not surprised. Intelligence reports suggested that humans were panicking in the face of Council superiority. Many of their colonies had begun evacuating civilians, which proved they understood the hopelessness of their situation. What about their fleet? Asked the Admiral. No sign of major warships in the area. A few patrol craft and mining vessels, but nothing that poses a threat to our forces. Kethvar nodded with satisfaction. The humans were running scared, just as he had expected. This would be over quickly and serve as an example to other species that might consider challenging. Council Authority. Meanwhile, on Kepler Station, Commander Rick Hayes was making final preparations for the coming battle. The former mining engineer had volunteered to stay behind when civilian evacuation began 3 days ago. With him remained 200 volunteers who had chosen to fight rather than flee. Hayes stood in the station's modified control center surrounded by displays showing the approaching enemy fleet. His weathered face showed no fear, despite knowing that most of them would not survive the next few hours. The important thing was to make the aliens pay a price they would remember. All teams report ready, announced Chief Martinez from the weapons control station. The Hispanic woman had spent 15 years in the Earth Defense Force before retiring to work in the mining industry. Like many veterans, she had answered the call when war began. Hayes activated the station-wide communication system. Attention all personnel. Enemy fleet will arrive in 20 minutes. Remember what we are fighting for. Our families, our freedom, our right to exist as free humans in this galaxy. He paused to look at the faces around him. Young and old, men and women from a dozen different Earth nations, all united in their determination to resist alien domination. Today we show them what happens when you threaten humanity. Make every shot count. The first fleet dropped out of hyperspace, exactly on schedule, with perfect Zephyrian precision. Admiral Kethfor studied the tactical displays with growing confidence. As his sensors swept the system, the human station appeared to be drifting powerless with minimal energy signatures. "They have abandoned the facility," reported Sub-Admiral Vexka. "Scans show only a few dozen life signs scattered throughout the structure. Probably maintenance personnel who could not evacuate in time." Kethfor smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Move the fleet into bombardment formation. We will reduce their station to scrap metal, can send the debris back to Earth as a message." The massive dreadnoughts began forming the traditional Zephyrian attack pattern, with the flagship at the center and supporting vessels in perfect geometric arrangements. It was a formation that had conquered star systems for over 1,000 years. And Kethfor saw no reason to change tactics now. Commander Hayes watched the alien fleet approach with cold satisfaction. The enemy was doing exactly what human intelligence had predicted they would do. Years of studying Zephyrian tactics had revealed their preference for overwhelming displays of power and rigid adherence to traditional formations. "They are moving into position," reported Lieutenant Jackson from the sensor station. "All enemy vessels are following standard attack patterns." Hayes activated his personal communicator to contact the hidden assets positioned throughout the system. "All units, this is Kepler Command. Execute Operation Sledgehammer on my mark." Around the system, dozens of objects that had appeared to be asteroids or space debris suddenly came to life. Hidden fusion reactors powered up and concealed weapons. Systems emerged from camouflaged housings. The rocks were not rocks at all, but carefully disguised human defense platforms. At the same time, what the aliens had dismissed as an empty asteroid field revealed its deadly secret. Hundreds of objects that had seemed like natural debris ignited drives and began accelerating toward the Zephyrian fleet. Each one was a human fighter craft that had been drifting silent and cold for the past week. Chief Warrant Officer Danny Clark led the first squadron of hidden fighters as they erupted from their concealment among the asteroids. His modified interceptor had been equipped with experimental stealth technology and weapons designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in alien defenses. "All right, people, this is it," he broadcast to the other pilots. "Remember what they taught us in training. Alien shields stop energy weapons, but they have trouble with solid projectiles at high velocity. Make your kinetic rounds count." The Zephyrian fleet was caught completely off guard as space around them suddenly filled with incoming threats from multiple directions. Admiral Kethfor stared at his tactical displays in shock as hundreds of new contacts appeared where his sensors had detected nothing moments before. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Where did these craft come from?" Sub-Admiral Vexka was frantically trying to coordinate defensive responses. "Unknown, sir. Our sensors showed no sign of enemy vessels in the area. They must have been using some form of advanced stealth technology." The first wave of human fighters reached the outer edge of the Zephyrian formation before the aliens could fully react. Danny Clark selected the nearest heavy cruiser and fired a burst of kinetic projectiles. At nearly 10% of light speed, the solid tungsten rods punched through the alien vessel's energy shields. As if they were not their dot, similar scenes played out across the battlefield as human pilots exploited their technological advantage. Zephyrian shields that could absorb massive energy blasts were useless against physical projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Within minutes, several alien warships were venting atmosphere and debris, but the real surprise was yet to come. Commander Hayes had been saving the best for last as the enemy fleet moved into optimal position. Kepler Station itself was the centerpiece of the human defense and appeared helpless only because Hayes wanted it that way. "All weapons free," he commanded as the Zephyrian flagship came within range. Show them what human miners can do when we get angry. The station's cargo containers suddenly split open to reveal concealed missile batteries loaded with nuclear-tipped warheads. The mining lasers that normally cut through asteroids swiveled to target the approaching dreadnoughts. Most importantly, the massive ore processing equipment began launching chunks of metal-rich rock at incredible velocity. Admiral Kethver watched in horror as his proud flagship came under withering fire from weapons that should not exist. Human mining equipment was hurling house-sized boulders with enough force to crack the hulls of his mighty dreadnoughts. The primitive barbarians were using rocks as weapons and somehow making it work. "Return fire," he ordered desperately. "Destroy that station immediately." But the Zephyrian fleet was trapped in a carefully planned kill zone with human forces attacking from multiple directions. The rigid formation that had been their strength became a weakness as ships collided while trying to maneuver away from incoming projectiles. Danny Clark and his squadron concentrated their attack on the enemy flagship, trying to cripple Zephyrian command and control. His kinetic rounds found their target and punched through the massive ship's armor plating. Secondary explosions began rippling through the vessel's interior as critical systems failed. Commander Hayes watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The aliens were learning what human creativity could accomplish when applied to warfare. Mining equipment became weapons. Asteroids became hiding places. Empty space became a trap. The tide of battle turned decisively when Hayes implemented the final phase of his plan. Loading himself into a modified mining mech armed with fusion charges, he launched directly at the Zephyrian flagship. Admiral Kethver had just enough time to understand what was happening before the human commander crashed into his bridge. The explosion that followed could be seen from the edge of the star system as the pride of the Zephyrian fleet broke apart. Admiral Kethver died never understanding how mere humans had defeated the finest warriors in the galaxy. The surviving Zephyrian vessels fled in disorder, leaving behind nearly half their fleet destroyed or crippled. News of the victory spread across human space within hours, while the Council reeled from their first major defeat in centuries. The victory at Kepler Station sent shockwaves through the galaxy, but the war was far from over. The Galactic Council had been embarrassed by their defeat, but they still commanded vast fleets and resources. What followed would be unlike any conflict a galaxy had ever witnessed. Captain Steve Murphy stood on the bridge of his captured Veltari cruiser, watching a Council supply convoy approach through the viewscreen. His ship broadcast the proper identification codes and followed standard traffic patterns. To any observer, it appeared to be just another crystal ship making a routine cargo run. Murphy had been a smuggler before the war started and knew how to make his vessel invisible in plain sight. His crew of 40 volunteers had spent weeks learning to operate the alien technology after capturing this ship during a raid on a remote outpost. The crystalline beings who originally crewed it had been released unharmed on a neutral world. Target convoy is maintaining course and speed, reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the sensor station. The young officer had been studying Veltari communication protocols for months and could perfectly imitate their harmonic language patterns. Weapon status? Asked Murphy. Sergeant Bob Williams checked his displays. The former Marine had figured out how to jury-rig human kinetic weapons into the alien ship's weapon mounts. All systems ready, Captain. We can punch through their shields before they know what hit them. Murphy nodded grimly. This kind of deception went against everything the honor-bound Veltari believed in. They simply could not imagine an enemy using captured ships to attack their own supply lines. It was one of many human tactics that the aliens found impossible to understand or counter. Remember, people, Murphy announced to his crew, we hit fast and disappear faster. Our job is to make them afraid to send supplies anywhere without heavy escort. Every convoy we destroy means fewer weapons pointed at human colonies. The supply convoy consisted of 6 cargo vessels protected by 2 light cruisers. Standard Council. Doctrine called for minimal escort in areas they considered secure. They were about to learn that no area was secure when humans were involved. Murphy waited until his ship was within point-blank range before giving the order to attack. All weapons fire. Take out their escorts first, then disable the cargo ships. The Veltari cruisers never had a chance to react. Human kinetic rounds tore through their crystal hulls before they could raise shields or return fire. Within minutes, both escort vessels were drifting wrecks, while the cargo ships found themselves surrounded by what they thought was one of their own vessels. "This is Captain Murphy of the Human Raider Payback," he broadcast on all frequencies. "Your escort is destroyed and your ships are disabled. Abandon your vessels immediately, and you will not be harmed." The alien crews had no choice but to comply. They were loaded into escape pods and given coordinates for the nearest Council outpost before Murphy's people began salvaging anything useful from the cargo ships. Weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, and equipment all disappeared into the human vessels' holds before leaving Murphy planted charges throughout the convoy's cargo ships. The explosions that followed would be visible for light years and serve as another message that human raiders could strike anywhere at any time. Similar scenes were playing out across Council space as human forces adopted tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Where other species fought with honor and predictable strategies, humanity embraced chaos and innovation. Lieutenant Colonel Beth Hamilton was pioneering an even more disturbing approach to naval warfare. Her task force consisted entirely of automated freighters packed with explosives and programmed to ram enemy formations. The Veltari, with their crystalline honor codes, could not comprehend such wasteful tactics. "Ghost Fleet is in position," reported her tactical officer as they watched the enemy approach their ambush point. "All vessels are running on automatic. Guidance with no life signs aboard." Hamilton studied the approaching Council patrol with cold calculation. 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen smaller vessels moving in perfect formation, just as their tactical manuals prescribed. They had no idea they were flying into a trap. "Execute ramming attack," she ordered. The Ghost Fleet suddenly changed course and accelerated directly toward the enemy formation. What had appeared to be harmless cargo vessels revealed themselves as guided missiles the size of city blocks. The Council ships tried to maneuver, but their rigid formations made them easy targets. The explosions were visible from orbit as fusion-powered freighters detonated against alien hulls. Within minutes, the entire enemy patrol was destroyed at the cost of some obsolete cargo ships that humans had converted into weapons. It was a trade ratio that favored humanity and horrified their enemies. On the ground, human forces were proving equally innovative. Major Tony Reeves had turned the siege of New Babylon Colony into a nightmare for the Hive Collective. The insectoid warriors were programmed for rigid hierarchical combat and could not adapt to human flexibility. Reeves crouched in the underground maintenance tunnels beneath the colony's main dome watching enemy troops search the empty buildings above. His Marines had been fighting in these tunnels for 3 days, using hit-and-run tactics that drove their enemies to distraction. "Beta Team is in position," whispered Corporal Janet Parker through his helmet communicator. "Bugs are moving through. Sector 7, just like you predicted." Reeves smiled grimly. The Hive Collective fought like a single organism with each warrior, following programmed responses. Once you understood their patterns, they became predictable. Humans, on the other hand, improvised constantly and never fought the same way twice. Alpha Team take them from behind. Charlie Team cut off their retreat. Delta Team be ready to collapse Tunnel Section 12 if they try to follow us. The attack began with human marines emerging from hidden passages throughout the colony. The insectoid warriors found themselves under fire from multiple directions by enemies who vanished as quickly as they appeared. Their compound eyes could track movement, a human stealth. Technology made them nearly invisible in the dim tunnels. Sergeant Rita Lopez led her squad through service passages that were too small for the larger alien warriors. They emerged behind enemy lines and began systematically destroying Hive Collective equipment with shaped charges and thermite grenades. "Communications hub is down," she reported as alien command posts erupted in flames. "Their coordination is breaking up." Without their communication network, the individual Hive warriors began acting independently, which made them even more vulnerable to human tactics. They had been bred for collective action and could not function effectively alone. The siege of New Babylon became a textbook example of how humans fought when outnumbered and outgunned. They used every advantage available, including their knowledge of the terrain and their ability to adapt faster than their enemies could respond. But it was Sergeant First Class Maria Santos who truly shocked the Council with her actions on the mining world of Series 7. When her unit was surrounded by an entire Zephyrian regiment, she made a decision that would become legend among human forces. Santos stood in the central control room of the planet's main mining facility, watching enemy forces close in from all directions. Her 20-man squad had been cut off during the evacuation and faced certain death or capture. The Zephyrians were demanding surrender and promising humane treatment. "Sergeant, what are your orders?" asked Private Ken Foster. The young soldier looked scared but determined to follow his leader's commands. Santos looked at her troops and saw the same expression on every face. They were prepared to die rather than become prisoners of species that saw humans as inferior beings. She walked to the main control panel for the planet's fusion reactors and began entering commands. "If we cannot hold this world, then we make sure they cannot use it either," she announced calmly. "Sometimes the best way to deny the enemy victory is to make victory meaningless." The fusion reactors that powered the mining equipment could be overloaded to create an explosion visible from space. It would destroy the entire mining complex and eliminate the Zephyrian regiments surrounding them. It would also kill every human in the facility. "All units, this is Santos," she broadcast on all frequencies, including enemy channels, "initiating reactor overload in 60 seconds. If you want to surrender to these lizards, you better do it fast." None of her soldiers moved toward the exits. They had made their choice and were prepared to follow their sergeant into Zeth rather than dishonor. The explosion that followed was indeed visible from orbit and took out an entire regiment of Zephyrian elite troops. The aliens had expected humans to surrender when faced with hopeless odds. Instead, they found enemies who would rather die fighting than accept defeat. News of the sacrifice at Series 7 spread through human space like wildfire. Santos and her squad became symbols of human determination and courage. More importantly, their actions sent a message to the Council that humans would never be conquered as long as any of them remained alive. Back on Earth, Dr. Kevin Torres was working on a different kind of weapon in his hidden laboratory. The computer scientist had been developing virus programs designed to infiltrate alien networks and disrupt their communications. "The key is understanding how they think," he explained to his team of programmers. 6 months of war had changed everything. The galaxy that had once dismissed humans as primitive upstarts now spoke their name with fear and respect. But the Galactic Council was not finished yet. In their desperation, they planned one final devastating blow that would end human resistance forever. The massive armada that assembled at the edge of the solar system was the largest fleet in galactic history. Over 800 warships from all 4 Council species had come together with one purpose: to destroy Earth and break the human spirit once and for all. Speaker Vexthara stood on the bridge of his new flagship, watching the blue marble of humanity's homeworld grow larger on the screens. The reptilian leader had lost 3 fleets to human tactics, but refused to admit that mere barbarians could defeat the Council's superior technology and numbers. "Final warning transmission ready," reported his communications officer. "All human. Vessels in the system have been ordered to surrender or be destroyed." Vexthara nodded grimly. "Send it. Let them know this is their last chance to avoid complete annihilation." The message that went out across all frequencies was simple and brutal. Surrender immediately and accept Council authority, or watch their homeworld burn. There would be no negotiation and no mercy for those who continued to resist. But the humans were not cowering in fear, as the Council expected. Instead, they found Jake Morrison waiting for them aboard the command ship USS Retribution. The former ambassador had shed his diplomatic uniform for military battle dress, and his transformation from peacemaker to warrior was complete. Around him stood the heroes of the war that had already become legend. Admiral Torres, who had revolutionized space combat tactics. General Collins, who had turned every human colony into a fortress. Dr. Vasquez, who had created weapons the galaxy thought impossible. All of them united in their determination to defend their homeworld. "Incoming transmission from the enemy flagship," reported Commander Grant, who had become Jake's chief of staff. "Speaker Vexthara wants to discuss terms for our surrender." Jake smiled coldly. "Put him through. I want to hear what he has to say." The main screen activated to show the massive reptilian glaring down at them with yellow eyes full of hatred. Behind him stood representatives of the other Council species, all confident that their overwhelming force would finally break human resistance. "Ambassador Morrison," Vexthara began in his grinding voice, "you see the fleet arrayed against you. 800 of our finest warships carrying enough firepower to turn your planet into molten rock. Surely even human stubbornness has limits." Jake looked calmly at the alien who had started this war. "What exactly are you offering, Speaker?" "Complete surrender. Your military will be disbanded and your colonies placed under Council administration. In return, we will spare the civilians on your homeworld and allow your species to survive as our servants." The other Council representatives nodded as if they were being generous. They still believed they were dealing with a primitive species that would eventually see reason when faced with overwhelming force. Jake's response was broadcast across the galaxy on all frequencies, ensuring that every species would hear humanity's final answer. "You came to our home. You threatened our families. You wanted to see what humans do when pushed to the wall. Look around you." As he spoke, the apparently empty space around the alien fleet began to come alive. Thousands of objects that had appeared to be asteroids or space debris suddenly activated, revealing themselves as hidden weapons platforms. The Council had walked directly into the largest trap in human history. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter revealed its deadly secret, as massive railguns built into Ceres and Vesta began charging their capacitors. These weapons could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed and had been under construction for the past 2 years. But the real shock came from Earth's moon. The ancient craters that had marked Luna's surface for millions of years suddenly opened like mechanical flowers, revealing the largest weapons humanity had ever built. Project Ragnarok consisted of fusion-powered mass drivers that could hurl mountain-sized chunks of rock across the solar system. Every world you hold, every station you control, every ship in your fleets, Jake continued as targeting data flowed across his screens. "We have marked them all. You wanted war? You got it. But this is how humans fight war." The first salvo from the hidden platforms caught the Council fleet completely by surprise. Kinetic rounds moving at tremendous velocity punched through their shields and armor as if they were made of paper. Dozens of warships simply vanished in clouds of superheated debris. Speaker Vexthara stared at his tactical displays in horror as his mighty armada began disintegrating around him. Impossible. Our sensors showed nothing but empty space. How could you hide so many weapons? Jake's smile was cold as winter. You never bothered to really study us, did you? Humans have been camouflaging weapons since we lived in caves. We just applied the same principles to space warfare. The lunar mass drivers opened fire next, sending chunks of rock the size of city blocks hurtling toward the alien formation. The Council ships tried to maneuver, but found themselves trapped in overlapping fields of fire from weapons they could not see until it was too late. Admiral Torres coordinated the defense from her command center deep inside Luna's protective. Rock, all platforms engage at will. Make every shot count. Show them what happens when you threaten humanity's children. The battle was less a fight than an execution, as human weapons systematically destroyed the largest fleet ever assembled. Council vessels that had ruled the galaxy for centuries were reduced to drifting wreckage in a matter of hours. Those alien ships that survived the initial barrage found themselves facing a new horror as human stealth fighters emerged from concealment throughout the solar system. Captain Danny Clark led squadrons of invisible killers that struck without warning and vanished before the enemy could respond. "This is for Kepler Station," he transmitted as his weapons found their targets. "This is for New Babylon. This is for Series 7 and every human who died fighting your tyranny." The psychological impact on the surviving Council forces was devastating. They had come expecting an easy victory over a primitive species, but instead found themselves outgunned and outfought by enemies they had underestimated. Speaker Vexthara's flagship was among the last to fall, as human forces concentrated their fire on the command vessel. The proud reptilian who had started this war by demanding human submission died knowing that his species would remember this defeat for generations. As the surviving Council ships prepared to flee Jake, Morrison's final transmission followed them back to their home systems. His words would be remembered long after the last human had died and the last star had grown cold. Tell the galaxy what you learned here. Tell them what happens when you threaten humanity. Tell them that we know where you live and we remember everything. Most importantly, tell them that humans do not forgive and we do not forget. The few Council vessels that escaped carried news of the disaster back to their capitals, where the remaining leaders realized their mistake. They had started a war they could not win against an enemy they did not understand. Within days, peace negotiators were requesting meetings with human representatives. The proud Galactic Council that had ruled for millennia was ready to discuss terms with the species they had dismissed as barbarians. Jake Morrison found himself once again in a diplomatic role, but the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Now he sat at the head of the negotiating table, while alien ambassadors waited nervously for his response to their proposals. "You offer us membership in your council as equals," he said after reviewing their terms. "You promise trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. You speak of cooperation and friendship between our species." The alien delegates nodded eagerly, hoping the human anger had cooled enough to allow for reasonable discussion. They were willing to give humans almost anything if it would end the war that was destroying their fleets and their confidence. Jake leaned back in his chair and studied the faces of beings who had once demanded his people's surrender. "Your terms are acceptable with one addition. Any species that attacks human territory or threatens human civilians will find themselves at war with all of humanity. We will not tolerate aggression against our people ever again." The agreement that followed would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. Humanity took its place not as servants or junior partners, but as equals with a voice that carried the weight of proven military power behind it. The Galactic Council survived, but was forever changed by its encounter with human determination. Never again Would they assume that technological superiority guaranteed victory, or that any species could be easily intimidated into submission? Years later, when peace had been restored and trade flowed freely between human and alien worlds, Jake Morrison would sometimes think about that day in the council chambers when everything began. A simple question had started it all. What happens when you corner a human? The galaxy had learned the answer the hard way. Humans do not surrender. They do not kneel. They do not accept defeat as long as any of them draw breath. Most importantly, they remember everything, and they never forgive those who threaten their families. The war was over, but its lessons would echo through the stars for generations.